This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Nam.
And this is Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we're reporting again from our remote locations in Northern California. Unfortunately, for people in Northern California, the fires continue to be, although better contained, still raging. Air quality in many parts of Northern California continue to be a problem. And regarding the pandemic, some slight, relaxation of some things, but it's still pretty much on soft lockdown, as I like to say. Other than that, we have a great show today, Jamal. We have a lot that we're going to talk about. We have a great interview with Daoud Kuttab, and we're going to be talking about a lot of issues, especially what's happening with the UAE and the so-called, how should we say, warming of relations with the government of Israel. We're going to talk about how Jared Kushner is pushing other Arab governments. And I don't know, Jamal, some crazy things that Joy Reid said. It's kind of weird.
You're absolutely right. We're going to be talking about several stories, also including Lara Trump, which recently joined the campaign of an Islamophobe. Her name is Laura Loomer. We'll talk about that. But first, let's watch and listen to Daoud Kuttab. He's going to be talking about a very important story that happened last week, as in reaction to the UAE-Israel, so-called peace deal. A cartoonist, a very famous cartoonist in Jordan, his name is Emad Hajjaj, one of the Arab world's best known and most beloved cartoonists. He was arrested. He was only released after an international outcry, which included an article by Daoud Kuttab. So he talks about his article, what happened. He also, of course, talks about the reaction in Jordan and the rest of the Arab world to the UAE normalizing relations with Israel. Let's watch and listen. A week ago, the Jordanian police arrested Emad Hajjaj, one of the Arab world's best known and most beloved cartoonists. He was released only after an international outcry, which included an article in the Washington Post by our guest Daoud Kuttab. Daoud Kuttab is a Palestinian journalist, former Ferris Professor of Journalism at Princeton University, and is currently Director General of Community Media Network, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to advancing independent media in the Arab region. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Daoud.
Thank you, Jamal, for having me.
An excellent and timely article, I would say, in the Washington Post. Congratulations. Your article in the Washington Post entitled "Jordan Claims It Cares About Freedom of Speech, It Just Threw a Political Cartoonist in Jail." For our listeners and viewers who are not familiar with the story and the arrest of Emad Hajjaj, please describe what happened to him.
Well, I think I need to give your audience a little background. As you know, a few weeks ago, the Israelis and the Americans signed an unusual agreement, what we call normalization, with the United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates basically broke the rank with Arab countries and made a separate agreement with Israel, even though they were signed on to the Arab peace plan, which said that normalization should follow the Israeli end of occupation and not before that. Anyways, Emad Hajjaj made a cartoon in a London-based publication in which he showed the Emir, or the Crown Prince of Emirates, holding the Israeli flag in the shape of a dove, and the dove basically spitting in his face. And the spit is the F-35 airplanes that the Emirates were hoping to buy, that the Israelis basically and the Americans have basically blocked, because Mr. Netanyahu doesn't want anybody to have any edge or to kind of break down the Israeli military edge in the Middle East. And so he did the cartoon, and then he found himself arrested and put in jail in Israel, in the Jordanian capital, or in the city of Salt. Yesterday, he was released.
You wrote in the article that Jordan's King Abdullah has publicly rejected punishing journalists for expressing their views and has said that he wants the sky to be the limit for press freedom. And yet, as Hajjaj's arrest demonstrates, the country's existing laws all too often contradict that admirable goal. Why are not government officials not following their own king's lead, really?
Well, this is a double standard, Jamal. The many countries and their leaders often speak in a very positive way to Western audiences, but back at home they follow different orders. In this case, there's a very unusual law that exists in Arab countries, which forbids and criminalizes anybody who hurts the relationship of other countries, friendly countries. And so the Arabic, they call that ta'kir safwa al-ilaqat, messing up the good relations. And while a journalist should have the freedom to express themselves and they don't represent the country, in this case, something preceded the cartoon that I think made things worse. The half-brother of King Abdullah, Prince Ali, whose sister is divorced from the ruler of Dubai, and is a very nasty divorce, basically tweeted one of the articles that had a nasty picture of the prince. And so the Emirates were very upset with Jordan and their prince. But then, obviously the king is not going to arrest his stepbrother. So the cartoon thing came, and I think our friend Emad Hajjaj became the scapegoat in this basically small problem between two Arab countries.
What I liked about your article is you didn't give the United States a pass, especially under the Trump era, because you wrote the fact that a U.S. president refers to journalists as enemies of the people has not gone unnoticed in these countries, and which is really the reality. I mean, this is how I would say for the very first time in a long time, American journalists, they feel intimidated by the administration. You see the entire world probably saw the exchanges that happen in the White House, and so it's not something that that just happens in third world countries, but in the United States, journalists under threat.
Well, I think this empowered leaders, and I would say autocratic leaders in many countries in the third world who, were under pressure often from the Western world on issues of human rights and democracy and press freedom. And in this case, countries like Jordan and other countries are not as worried about somebody from Washington calling them up on this issue because, the U.S. is failed, or the Trump administration has failed in living up to the First Amendment, which was looked up for a long time by many people around the world. And so I think that gave autocratic leaders further room to violate the rights of journalists without having to worry about paying a price for it politically.
Now, you yourself, as a journalist, you've been arrested. I know before you've been stopped at airports, and you've been an advocate really for journalist rights, not only in the Middle East, but across the globe. What's going on? You also say Jordan is really, it's not the worst if we compare it to Egypt and other countries. So what's the whole kind of...
Plenty of friends in Egypt who are in jail without any cause. In fact, I was banned from entering to Egypt a few months ago, and we know what happened to our Saudi friend Jamal Khashoggi, who paid his life for journalism. So it's not an easy profession in this part of the world, and it is getting difficult. We were under a lot of pressure during the pandemic because, as you can imagine, governments become much more controlled, and the security apparatus becomes much more controlled when there is a pandemic. And so issues of human rights are thrown out of the window often. So yes, you have to fight. I mean, I try to be as professional as I can, even though I was critical of Jordan. I tried to put it in context of the Middle East, and Jordan, has its ups and downs in this issue. But I didn't want people to come away thinking that it's the worst. No, there are much worse countries, but still, we are holding the country up to the standards that its own leaders have set, with what the king has said, and so on. And that's what my article tried to say.
So now going to this big story, I mean, today they're making a big event out of the landing of the plane carrying the flight from Tel Aviv to the UAE, carrying American and Israeli officials there. And a couple of weeks ago, I think we spoke on this show to Diana Bhutto. She described the level of disappointment and pretty much called it a stab in the back for Palestinians. What's happening in Jordan and other Arab countries? I mean, are people just being spectators, or, I mean, how they're looking at it, really?
Well, I think you have two problems happening at this time in the entire Arab world. Arab unity is facing its probably worst stage yet. I mean, countries are fighting against each other. There's different axes of power. Somebody argued today that Saudi Arabia gave permission to Israel to fly over its airspace, but Qatar is not allowed to fly over Saudi airspace. So there's internal problems in the Arab countries. The Palestinian cause has ceased to be, or to some Arab countries, the leading cause for that united Arab countries behind it. So there are problems that we're facing, and I think to a certain degree it's causing many countries to depend on themselves and to their own people. And the Palestinian aspect, I think this is forcing Palestinians to rethink the Mahmoud Abbas ideology of depending on the UN and the international community in the Arab world to bring about end of occupation. And I think people want to have a revisit to that methodology. And I think there needs to be some kind of elections to allow Palestinians to decide what kind of state they want, how do they want to get there, and who do they want to lead the Palestinians in the next period. So we have, we have to really return to the source of power, which is the people, whether it's in Palestine or other countries, and see what they think.
Well, I mean, you're talking about that, about the source of power, but what about, I mean, do you think this move, I mean, we know it weakens the position of the Palestinians. Is it getting popular support from other Arab countries? Because Israel keeps flouting that Bahrain is going to be next, or Oman is going to be next, and maybe even Saudi Arabia is going to be next. I mean, is this boycott, is this going to break the boycott, really?
I don't think so. In fact, I've tweeted that no other country is going to, in the near future, at least until after the US elections, will follow the UAE suit for the following reasons. First, Israel has not been nice to the Arab Emirates. They basically stabbed the Emirates themselves, or spit in their face, as Emad Hajjaj would say. And there has been a strong backlash in Palestine and in many Arab countries. There's cultural boycotts being called for the Emirates. So the cost of normalizing with Israel is very high, and the benefit doesn't seem to be very equally high. So I think most countries will not do it unless they really have to. And we saw even Sudan stood up to Pompeo and told him no, in a very clear way. And the same with Bahrain. So I think unless Trump is re-elected, I don't think you'll see many more countries in the short term following suit of UAE.
Actually, this was a perfect segue to the elections, because I'd like to know how Arabs in the Middle East, in Jordan, Palestine, and other countries are viewing these elections, especially the RNC. Recently, you mentioned Pompeo, which was unprecedented for him to be really appearing in a convention, or unprecedented for a Secretary of State, and not only do it from the United States, but he was doing it from the top of the King David's Hotel in Jerusalem. I mean, what message does this send to Arabs in the region?
Well, it depends. If you're Mohammed bin Zayed or Mohammed bin Salman, I think you want Trump to be reelected. Many others, and most people don't want Trump to be elected because they saw the havoc he caused to Palestinians and to Arab countries and in many parts of the world, and the way he is basically siding with dictators in our region, whether it's his favorite dictator Sisi or other dictators. And so I think, it's a split between people and regimes, between those who are liberal and democratic in their points of view and those who are autocratic and conservative, and they want America to basically give them a blank check to do what they want. Let's hope that Americans see the sense in not giving this crazy guy another 4 years, and let's hope that there will be a more sane foreign policy that does not stand with dictators and oppresses indigenous people who are fighting for their own freedom, whether it is indigenous Americans, Black Americans, or immigrants, or in the rest of the world, people like Palestinians and others who are fighting to end occupation and annexation and colonization.
I mean, do you actually feel, or do Arabs in general actually feel that a Biden administration will make a difference? It will be, when it comes to the Middle East, it's going to take different positions, or in the case of Palestinians, it's going to reverse the decision on having the U.S. embassy move to Jerusalem.
No, I don't think. I think most people understand that also Biden is pro-Israeli, but he's not crazy pro-Israeli. So they're hoping that there will be some sanity in the White House, where you don't stop funding hospitals that were providing badly needed cancer care to children from Gaza, or when you stop countries from cooperating with the Palestinian Authority to basically manage itself, and so on and so forth. So no, people are not. I think nobody's naive to think that Biden is going to be the liberator. They had too much hope in Obama, who Biden worked with, and that has basically filtered out. And so people are not expecting much from Biden in the positive sense. They're just hoping that the craziness will stop.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you again, Daoud, and hope to talk to you very soon.
Thank you, Jamal, and take care. Bye-bye.
Well, that's the voice and the face of Daoud Kuttab, journalist, actually one of the most, foremost journalists in the Arab world, and based in Jordan, and doesn't paint as rosy a picture of the peace relations or the warming of relations and the peace agreement between UAE and the Israelis, Jamal.
Absolutely not. And he talked about, of course, about the arrest of the cartoonist. But since then, almost every single day, I see a new cartoon popping up talking about the so-called normalization and poking fun about it. And of course, a lot of criticism in Arab media in general, including actually like some Gulf states like Kuwait. Kuwait has been very, very critical and outspoken, and of course Qatar, and then even in the Saudi press. So the Trump slash Netanyahu slash Kushner, whatever coalition, they're trying to put this major rosy picture that they're going to have other Arab countries joining in, but it doesn't seem that's going to happen anytime soon. Now, just a couple of hours ago, Jess, I watched a speech by Mahmoud Abbas.
Yeah, I'm curious. What did he say?
Yeah, so that was a long speech, kind of slow going, very typical of Mahmoud Abbas, going through all the items, but few highlights in it. He said that no one on earth has the right to speak on behalf of Palestinians. He was saying that the PLO is the only representative, or it is the umbrella organization for all Palestinian organizations and Palestinians in the homeland and the diaspora. In his speech, he added that he called the agreement, the UAE-Israel agreement, as a poisonous dagger. That's what he said. It's a poisonous dagger in the back of Palestinians. And he reiterated that there will never be a state in Gaza, a Palestinian state in Gaza, nor a state without Gaza. Because, now also there are rumors that, they're rehashing or the argument that, there can be a Palestinian state in Gaza and then forget about the West Bank. So he's reiterating that that's not going to happen. A lot of criticism. He lays it out. Nothing surprising.
But I have a question for you, Jamal. Does anybody on the world stage really care anymore about what Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas is saying these days? What credibility? I mean, this is part of a larger picture question that I want to ask you. The address for the Palestinian people seems to have been either misplaced or lost right now. I mean, my impression, correct me if I'm wrong, does it seem like the voice of Abu Mazen is carrying much weight within the international community, let alone the Arab world? Am I missing something?
Well, we can take it further down the road or actually go backward and think about Oslo. Mahmoud Abbas is considered as
the architect.
One of the architects of Oslo, if not the architect of Oslo. So all roads lead to there. So when you see criticism, whether from Palestinians or others, criticizing all the mistakes that has been made, just even by agreeing to all the terms in Oslo, they think of Mahmoud Abbas. So they say, okay, now you are very critical, you fought very hard, he was very adamant about many things, including security coordination with Israel. He once called security coordination with Israel as sacred when he was getting criticized when the Israeli occupation was violating these security agreements, invading Ramallah, going to Palestinian territories, extrajudicially assassinating people there, conducting raids, arrests. And they were saying, why are you continuing to have these security agreements with them? And he specifically said, well, we've signed agreements. He wanted to show that, we're standing by our agreements. The security coordination with Israel is sacred. This is something non-negotiable. So he was adamant till just a few months ago, adamant about continuing that relationship. And every time something happened, Netanyahu basically stabbed him in the back. So talking about stabbing in the back or reneging on security agreements, Netanyahu's government, I would say, more than others, I'm not absolving the other governments, but every single time they reneged on agreements, they did not fulfill their obligations. They did not withdraw from Area C, which is the largest swath of land. They continued to allow settlers to move in illegally in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. They continued funding settlements. And Mahmoud Abbas, and that's the criticism I think that Mahmoud Abbas faces the most, is that he basically continued, instead of walking away from that table, after he found out quickly that the Israelis are not adhering to the agreement or the clauses in Oslo. After finding out that even under, if we go back to Obama, he was not forcing the Israelis to adhere to these agreements. He was critical, especially towards the end, and with Secretary Kerry. I remember Secretary Kerry personally criticizing Netanyahu. But it was too late. It was too late. And then when Mahmoud Abbas met with Donald Trump he said, this guy's a great guy. He's going to bring peace to the Middle East, if you remember that. I mean, the thing is, I wish people have a longer term memory, or
They don't.
or maybe they just pretend they don't remember. But when Donald Trump, he met with him and said, "Oh, this he will be able to bring peace to the Middle East," and he drank the Kool-Aid that was given to him by Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, and by the time he found out about it, was too late. And that is really the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is, sadly, Mahmoud Abbas has been 2 and 3 steps behind on taking any sort of action. And when he takes actions like you asked me about today, okay, so now you criticize. He's, by the way, saying he's going to the Arab League. This is laughable.
Well,
the
it's
Arab
a joke.
League
It's a joke.
is useless. Is more useless than the UN. I mean, he's been to the UN. He's spoken in front of the UN. He's spoken in front of the United Nations Security Council, and reminded them about the resolutions that Israel has been, basically breaking all the time. Nothing happened. So, do you think something is going to happen at the Arab League?
No, nothing's going to happen. And I just don't think that Abu Mazen has any political equity left in the bank. He's overdrawn his political equity from the 1990s with the Oslo Agreement and has been spending it, and is in debt, and is perceived by a lot of people in the Arab world on the street as kind of caving in to Israeli demands to be the kind of police force for the Israeli military in the West Bank and previously in Gaza. So I don't think he has a lot of credibility, and he can make these great statements, but they're really falling on deaf ears right now. Nobody really is going to, give much credibility. I mean, the words sound okay, but so what? We haven't had an election in Palestine in how many years now, Jamal? The economic situation for Palestinians, whether it's the West Bank, Gaza, or in 1948, is not very good right now. What has Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority done for Palestinians, let alone Palestinians in the diaspora or the refugee, the huge refugee population outside of Palestine? So, it's like you said, it's too little, too late. Now, talking about the UAE, the fact that I just want to kind of point out that it is kind of interesting that Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia had this, and the Crown Prince has had this love affair with Donald Trump and with Jared Kushner. Kind of interesting that we have not, by the silence and what we have heard on the Saudi press, is kind of interesting with the UAE and the Israeli warming of relations. My hunch is, and I could be wrong, Jamal, is that they're making the calculation that Donald Trump may not get reelected. So trying to push this normalization under the Trump regime may not be in the political best interests of the rest of the region, even though they may want to, have warming relations for lots of complex reasons with the Israeli government. The timing may not be right to kind of fully come out of the closet with that. What do you think?
Well, you're absolutely right. And actually, actually this applies to both Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is what they have been dying to do.
Right.
What they've been dying to do now before, of course, the November 3rd elections, especially for Donald Trump, is to bring, and that's why you see this shuttle diplomacy, Pompeo in the region, Kushner's flying also there, and back and forth. They want to have the ceremony signed just like Camp David at the White House. Right. At the White House, the Rose Garden or whatever outside, and put the show of they've invited Saudi Arabia, they've invited Egypt, they invited what they call Arab countries allies, like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, some Gulf countries. And as far as I know, there has not been any RSVPs
Well, of course.
for this ceremony. So that's why you haven't seen the announcement. They're dying to have it ASAP, either September, October, before the elections, and make a big spectacle out of it, a big show.
It's not going to happen. I mean,
we don't know. I mean,
it might. I guess it might.
In this atmosphere, just with all the arm twisting and pressure and whatever, something might happen. But so far, as of today, I mean, this is one of the number one items on the Trump campaign's agenda, is to have that signing ceremony happen at the White House.
Well, let me ask you about two other leaders, Jamal, who have peace agreements with the Israelis. I haven't heard much from King Abdullah, and I haven't heard much from President al-Sisi. What are you hearing in the Arab press about the king and the president?
Well, the King Abdullah, it's a complex scenario. And this is kind of, they're keeping it today under wraps. And again, if you know the region very well and keep up with the news, you'll know what I'm talking about. But the sister of King Abdullah was married to the Emir.
Right.
And she ran away first to London.
Right.
She's basically... she ran away from the palace. And sued him. There was a lawsuit. So just on a personal level, there is no love lost between the Hashemite, I would say the Hashemite family in Jordan with the UAE because of this incident. This is a personal incident. So their relationships. The relationship between the UAE and Jordan is, I would say, very cold at this point. It's not, they don't have severed relations, but because of this, and this is like a family affair, kind of like a divorce case. This is the beloved sister of the king, and she was basically, mistreated, from what I read. Right. It was a bitter lawsuit. Right. And, you just have to Google that and you'll find the details about the lawsuit in London where she took up residence there. And then the other thing is there was a tweet by King Abdullah's brother or half-brother.
The Crown Prince?
The Crown Prince is his son.
Now, so this is just one of the princes.
Well, this is his brother, his half-brother, who basically was critical of the UAE and was critical of the normalization with Israel, and that also had a lot of play. So in the media. So I can tell you, I don't know about Jordan's position. But Jordan's position, and they're trying to keep the peace and not kind of break relations. There is a personal level issue. And then also, of course, Jordan is the home of a large population of Palestinians or Jordanians with origins from Palestine. And they are definitely not too happy. And I can see this, I can read it in the Jordanian press, except they don't want to kind of bring it down, like let's say, to the streets.
But listen,
that's why they kind of put the cartoonists in jail, because they don't want someone to rock the boat even further.
Sure, but King Abdullah is a smart guy. Al-Sisi is a political calculator that's very shrewd. They see the potential writing on the wall of hitching their wagons to the Trump administration and to Jared Kushner right now. So from a political standpoint, it makes sense for both of them, even though they have the so-called, cool or cold peace with the Israelis, to just kind of lay low right now and see what happens with the upcoming election, not to make any crazy statements. And I think the same goes for the rest of the Arab world, who may or may not want to have warming economic relations with the Israelis. Not much, probably, thinking through the calculations about what may or may not happen with another Trump election is probably what's going on. Now, having said that, if Trump gets reelected, you can expect, Jamal, that the number of Arab countries lining up to warm relations with the Israelis will explode dramatically. So, whether or not that would happen under a Biden administration, you could make an argument either way. But if Trump gets elected for another 4 years, Jamal, expect the entirety of the Arab world, almost without exception, with maybe a few exceptions, will be lining up to send planes back and forth to Tel Aviv and warming relations with the Israelis. There will be, put it this way, Jamal, people will be standing in line ready to throw the Palestinians under the bus if Trump gets reelected.
Maybe yes. I mean, I don't see it with the population, but governments are, it's a whole different ball game. You've asked me earlier about Sisi.
Yeah.
And Sisi has a very strong relations with Donald Trump and the Trump administration.
Right.
And I say, and I give you an example just recently, because they have a major dispute over the Nile River water with Ethiopia.
Right.
Messing around with the flow of the water, which actually Egypt made specific threats.
Right.
That, if they keep doing that, building dams and diverting the flow of the water, that's going to, create probably a war between the two. The United States, reacting to this, has recently suspended $100 million in U.S. aid to Ethiopia. So the United States is taking the side of Egypt. So the Egyptian government, I should say, might feel obligated, and especially since they are the first country to sign a peace agreement. It really puts Jordan and Egypt both in a pickle because of what happened. But then you have to compare apples with apples. Right. Jordan and Egypt both have had hostilities between them and Israel. They share borders, and so that's a whole different game than bringing the UAE, which has never been confronted by Israel, had any issues with Israel,
right,
to kind of, throw the Palestinians, as you said, under the bus, to receive approval to purchase some F-35s. And this actually might not happen.
It may not happen.
It might not happen. And to have a flight, an El Al flight to fly from Tel Aviv to the UAE, so some Israelis can come do some shopping in the Abu Dhabi Mall and the Dubai Mall. Or recently, they're making a big hoopla in the Israeli media about the first kosher restaurant opening up in Abu Dhabi. So it's like the added benefits to the UAE are going to be very insignificant. And it's more like just for show, as far as what I have been seeing and reading, and that's what frustrates everyone.
But as I said, I think if Trump does get reelected, and again, just to put it out there for all of our Arab Talk listeners and viewers, I'm on record saying that it's still a real possibility that Donald Trump could get reelected. But if he does get reelected, you're going to see a real significant kind of increase in diplomatic things going on between Trump, Kushner, and the rest of the Arab world. And I wouldn't be surprised if those F-35s, if Trump gets reelected, that I won't be surprised if that kind of gets through the Congress. By the way, the UAE, I've said this, they're involved in so many dirty deals. They've had intelligence collaborations with the Israelis for years and years and years. They continue to play such a dirty role in the massacre and catastrophe that's going on in Yemen right now. They have all sorts of crazy intelligence agreements with the United States. This is a pretty depraved. The Emiratis are pretty depraved when it comes to the dirty deals that they're doing below the surface, Jamal.
Well, we're going to keep talking about this. It will be interesting to see if they'll participate in Trump's parade before the elections. Arab countries.
We'll see.
As they've been used now for Israeli Hasbara. congratulations to the UAE for being now used in the Israeli Hasbara, which I see it, read it, watch it every single day. So we're monitoring a couple of other stories,
Right.
just which is like all of a sudden, with every show we talk about, or almost every show, there is an incident of Islamophobia. We've had several guests talk about Islamophobia, in the United States, and this week was very interesting because we have two stories. One is the Trump's, I guess, daughter-in-law, Lara Trump. She recently joined this Islamophobe. She's actually
Committed.
She's a self-described. She's proud.
Self-identified. She is.
Yeah, an
Yeah.
Islamophobe. Her name is Laura Loomer, and of course, President Trump's daughter-in-law. And she's also, by the way, she's also a campaign advisor. She's running around, with her in Florida, campaigning with her. And this Laura Loomer is very terrible. I mean, just even Trump later on, after he actually sent her congratulations for winning the nomination, the GOP nomination, started to walk it back, said, he didn't know everything about her. But basically, just give you some idea, aside her describing herself as a proud Islamophobe, that's what she calls herself. In 2017, she tweeted, "How many more people need to die before everyone agrees that Islam is cancer? And we should never let another Muslim into the civilized world." Okay?
Yeah.
Then in 2018, she was dropped from Twitter, from
Instagram.
Even Uber won't pick her up, Lyft won't pick her up. Okay, Facebook. She was hounding and harassing both, mostly Representative Ilhan Omar.
Right.
Okay, harassing her and posting things on Instagram and Facebook, which, by the way, they were removed in May 2019, harassing her and telling her that she has to redo her swear-in on the Bible, not on the Quran. She is a kook, but imagine, she is like a certified kook, a bigot, an Islamophobe, and she is now the GOP nominee and she's challenging, by the way, the Representative Lois Frankel. He's the Democrat. From
Yeah, but it's a
Florida.
solidly Democratic population. The chances of her winning are not that great. I mean, it's possible, but you're right, Jamal. The larger issue is that the GOP hitched its wagon to a self-described, self-identified person who spews hate every single day against Muslims all over the world, whether they're in the United States or anywhere else. I've watched some of the video clips and some of the speeches that she's given, Jamal, and she's been condemned roundly by, as many people as, can, who comment on this. But yet in Florida, in a Republican, not a Republican dominated area, but in Trump country, she's going to be the candidate. We shall see, right? But this has been kind of a crazy week for lots of crazy things being said about Islam, Jamal. And I have to tell you, I have watched Joy Reid and her comments multiple times now. I personally was shocked by the comparison that Joy Reid, who likes to fancy herself as not just liberal, Jamal, but as a progressive, she made some pretty Islamophobic comparisons about on her TV show, on her new TV show. And what's interesting, Jamal, and Representative Ilhan Omar asked her to apologize. She has refused to apologize for her really blatantly Islamophobic comment.
they're trying to wiggle their way out and trying to kind of gloss it over, but you're absolutely right. Of course, she's on MSNBC, which is considered to be a progressive network
No, liberal. I wouldn't say progressive.
liberal or whatever. And she's a woman of color, host, and Joy-Ann Reid, which basically, this is in a segment on this Tuesday, airing in her primetime show, The Read Out. She was discussing U.S. President Donald Trump's unwillingness to reprimand Kyle Rittenhouse, that's another story which we talked about last week, for his shooting and murder of two individuals and injuring a third one with an assault rifle during Black Lives Matter protests. And then she began saying this crazy thing, saying when leaders, let's say in the Muslim world, talk a lot of violent talk and encourage their supporters to be willing to commit violence, including on their own bodies, in order to win against whoever they decide is the enemy. We in the US media describe that they are radicalizing these people, particularly when they are radicalizing young people. That's how we talk about the way Muslims act.
Wow.
She added, when you see what Donald Trump is doing, is that any different from what we describe as radicalizing people? And then she went on adding, saying, basically she's saying it's part of the culture of Muslims to
Hey, Jamal, I have a question for you. What's a Muslim leader? What does that mean? Is she talking about
Ask
sheikhs?
her. So anyway, she's been called upon to apologize. She has not.
She has not apologized.
They're trying to say that she was making the point about a double standard and she was not agreeing with it, which did not sound like it at all. And which, by the way, Reid has previously faced criticism, this is not the first time, for remarks made on a blog which were considered derogatory towards Muslims. So that's not the first time. And the LGBTQ community. Reid apologized for those remarks. So people can check out these remarks. They're still there available for people. So it was not the first time that she kind of stuck her foot, where
in her mouth,
and then she's like, acts like, oh, I didn't mean it, I didn't understand what you're talking about.
No, this is such.
You are on prime time. You have to be careful about every single word you say.
No, I don't care. I mean, she doesn't have to be careful. What I object to, Jamal, is that this is somebody who likes to promote herself as progressive, as open-minded, as being very smart. That's part of her brand. And she could make such a blatant Islamophobic comment, refuse to apologize, and is, despite the pressure coming from, really the broad spectrum of the progressive community saying, hey, what's going on? She is refusing to back down and refusing to apologize. I mean, that speaks to some sort of character flaw, in my opinion, and her bona fides, whether or not she's a real progressive. Maybe she's a PEP, Jamal. Maybe she's progressive except for Palestine, or a PEI, progressive except for Islam. I don't know what to call these.
Well, maybe she is the liberal face of Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, she could be. She could be the liberal face of Tucker Carlson. I found her comments were bad enough, Jamal. But for me, from my standpoint, the thing that made it much worse is her trying to weasel her way out of what was clearly an Islamophobic comment and weasel out of an apology. If you say something like that, come clean, be direct, apologize, and say, I'll do better next time. That gives you much more credibility. Otherwise, she just sounds so weak and so kowtowing to some other kind of influence. I'm not sure what it is. Very disturbing.
It's very disturbing. We'll keep an eye on this story. We're coming to an end to.
Oh, that's
show.
right. Another show, Jamal.
Time flies.
When you're having fun.
Listening to Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM, San Francisco. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the All our episodes are there, our podcasts, and we will talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.